Alright, I hit the button. Welcome to today's session. Today we're going to be talking about, as you can read in these very big letters, accessibility in the realm of game sound, and specifically getting into making games accessible through game sound. So, just to lay the foundation, since I'm sure everybody here knows what game accessibility means and what I mean when I say that, but just to lay the foundation, yeah, let's just talk a bit about it. So, essentially, game accessibility refers to the usability of games for people with disabilities, whether they're sensory, motor, or cognitive disabilities. And this can include making games with visual accessibility, motor accessibility, so like designing for different controllers and such, and of course, audio accessibility, which is the one we care about, today at least. So, many strides have been made in recent years to standardize more accessibility practices, which is part of why I wanted to do this session. And it may seem kind of daunting at first, like some of these are pretty daunting, but honestly, all it takes is a few baby steps in the right direction, and that'll drastically improve accessibility for players. And because of this, it's absolutely something to keep in mind when making games, because not only does it improve the experience for again, for people with disabilities, but it can also improve the experience for just everybody across the board. So let's just hop right in. Audio accessibility. What can we do to make a game more accessible through audio? So one of the biggest things about audio accessibility is it not only helps visually impaired, but it also helps hearing impaired gamers as well. And coupling this with the fact that these improvements can often help everyone across the board, regardless of ability, it's just good to keep in mind. So, for example, the inclusion of subtitles and closed captioning, they're technically a piece of visual accessibility, but they help hearing impaired gamers. And vice versa, described video is a piece of audio feedback and accessibility that can help visually impaired gamers. So there's going to be some crossover between the two today, and I'll try to point it out when we get to it, or whenever it comes up. So most of the stuff we're going to be talking about today is likely going to be toggleable in options menus. Some things do have to be considered in the full design though, so once again I'm going to let you know when that comes up. And those things usually have effects in other places in the game as well. So yeah, I'll just mention that when we get to it. And lastly, before we get into the meat of it, I did a ton of research on this, used a lot of great resources. I'll drop them all in the resources channel if you want to check it out after the session, which I'd highly recommend because a lot of it goes into a lot more depth than I ever could, and like a bit more into less the theories and practices behind it and more of the, okay, why do we need to do this? Okay, what are some of the best ways to do this? And yeah, it's really, really good. Definitely look at those resources when I pop them in there. And so today we're just going to be going through a bunch of examples and start off with the easier things to implement, then moving on and get harder and harder as we go on, roughly. There will be some that are kind of out of order, maybe just depending on the game, but that's roughly how I wanted to structure it. So, hopping right in, the first thing, having different sound cues and unique sound cues for different objects and events is surprisingly important when it comes to accessibility, and it is something that is purely focused on having stronger sound design. So this is one of those things that's going to be game-wide and not exactly toggleable. So you're definitely going to want to do this since it's just a good thing in regard to the sound design. So an example of this, I have to bring up Halo. We're not even 5 minutes in and I'm doing it. In every single Halo game, if you pick up and pull out different weapons, it plays a different sound cue. So pulling out an energy sword is very different than the sound pulling out a rocket launcher, which both of which are very different from pulling out a shotgun. So the equipping sounds are different, shooting sounds are different, reloading sounds are different. All of it gives information to the player. And then there's something like switching between options. So like grenades in the example of Halo, they should provide different sound cues as well. So in a game like Halo Reach, for example, if you switch between grenades, the two grenade types, it would make a different sound to be like, okay, you have a frag grenade equipped or you have the plasma grenade equipped. Whereas in Halo 4, it removed that and just had one sound that played when you switch grenades. So you have no idea what kind of grenade you have equipped until you throw it. So not only does this make things difficult for visually impaired gamers, but also when your game includes an option to turn off the HUD, like Halo does, with the blind skull, you have no idea what grenade you have equipped. Whereas in previous titles like Halo Reach, you could close your eyes, you could turn on the blind skull, and you could just tell from the sound cue alone what you have equipped. So, unique sound cues, definitely have those. Just great sound design advice there. Alright, moving on to the next one. Once again, this is something you're probably just going to want in your game regardless. But we're going to talk a bit more about it later on down the line. But try to isolate dialogue and important sound effects whenever you can, over the background noise and the music and stuff. So dialogue in particular can really benefit from this, because I'm sure we've all played a game where you just can't really tell what the character's saying at a certain point because either the music's too loud, the ambient sounds around them are just going off too much, there's other dialogue talking over it. Like I know in Borderlands that happens sometimes. If you've got one quest going on, there's voiceover in your ear, but you're talking to someone in the game, neither of them are stopping. So you just can't hear what anyone's saying. Regardless of the cause, having dialogue in particular really stand out to the player can really help with just reading it, like audibly at least. And sound effects also really benefit from this. So let's say you have a really important sound effect, you want it to cut through the mix. You can do that. It's really important to do that. We're going to talk about how to do that later. But sidechain compression will be your best friend for this. It is a bit more difficult in gameplay, and it's a lot easier in cutscenes since, it's completely curated. It happens the same every single time. So you can just time the cue to exactly when it's supposed to happen in cutscenes. But gameplay, it's super dynamic. Anything can happen at any point. That's the whole point of adaptive audio, adaptive music, all of that fun stuff that I talk way too long about. But it is possible. Again, sidechain compression. But this is something that just falls under mixing, so you're going to want to do this regardless of intent for accessibility, I guess. So, next one, you see this in every single game pretty much. It's fairly standard in the industry at this point, volume controls. So, as you'd expect, it can help for isolating elements. If anything's too loud, you can drop the volume of it. And it just offers a bit more individual control for each of the elements in the soundscape of the game. So usually the most basic ones are usually the master volume, music, sound effects, and voice. But I found a couple others that are often included. There's narration, which I've seen as a separate one that's usually for an announcer, like in the example in the picture. I believe this is Killer Instinct. They have an announcer in-game, so you can adjust the volume of the announcer specifically, separate from the actual vocals in the game. And it's also got ambience on there as well, which, as you'd expect, is the ambient level noise. So if you don't want any of that, completely just, okay, the music and then the non-diegetic sounds or the sound effects for everything. Makes the mix a lot clearer for players that might have a hard time distinguishing different sounds. So that's something really important to keep in mind, as well as having UI or HUD specific volume. Because once again, UI sounds sometimes really need to be punched through the mix. So just having a separate volume control specifically for this, and not just lumping it under sound effects, can make sure that lowering the sound effects volume doesn't affect the actual extremely important HUD sounds or UI sounds that the player needs to hear. And moving on to a bit harder, but still stuff you'd generally want to include, visual indicators and that sort of thing. Definitely something you want to keep in mind in the full design of the game. And the main thing here is to ensure that nothing essential is conveyed just through audio. So if a grenade lands on the ground beside you, you should probably have a warning indicator, or like visually just say like, hey, grenade, or let's say you're getting shot, like in the picture on the bottom right, Gears of War, it shows, hey, you're getting shot, and it shows the direction in which you're getting shot from. Or you can have something like with Halo 5 and its thruster. When you use the thruster, that little warning symbol to the right of the shield bar appears, and it goes away once your thruster's recharged. So just having something like that to provide feedback to the player of, hey, this thing happened, or this thing is happening right now, take cover. It's just a generally really good practice to do. And yeah, you can also do this through subtitles as well as the UI. So Minecraft is an excellent example when they added subtitles a couple years ago. We're going to talk about Minecraft a bit more in a minute. But the Minecraft subtitles do a great job of conveying to the player, hey, zombies near you, or there's lava, because they provide sound effects in the subtitles as well, which is great. And another really important thing for this one, have directional indicators as well for 3D sounds. So for the Gears of War example specifically, there's the two kind of taking damage symbols around the HUD. One of them, it clearly shows, okay, it's in front and to the right a bit, and then one of them is to the back and to the left. So that just shows the player, hey, this is where that sound is coming from in case you can't hear it. So really useful. You're going to want to have it. Alright, and now we're starting to get into the stuff that's not extremely common, or at least this example isn't, but it is fairly simple to implement, so that's why I'm putting it here. Basically what this is having each of the options in a menu narrated to the player. So, like I said, still not super common, but games like Mortal Kombat, one of the new ones, I believe Mortal Kombat 11 did this, which was found really well. So, what kind of menu options should be narrated? Honestly, all of them. So if you get to a menu, it should say what the menu is, what the submenu is, if there is one, what the current option selected is, and then what the options are for it. So have something like the picture example, which I found from GameDeveloper.com or Gama Sutra. Basically, it just shows how it should progress, showing like the or how it should progress with what the narrator says. So start with the settings, then controls, and then the option selected, what it does, and then the controls to read it out. Like I said, it's still not super common, but it is fairly simple. All you really need to do is just have voice lines for each of the options. And yeah, just read them out whenever you highlight a new option, pretty much. That's the base way to do it. It's not too difficult, but it's still a lot more voiceover to do. So Moving on next to the speaker options, which again isn't super common. You see it occasionally in bigger titles, but regardless, I wanted to bring it up. Mainly because mono support is something that you're not often seeing. But basically, it's great for unilaterally deaf gamers, or let's say one of your headphones broke, so you only have it coming through the left ear or the right ear. I'm sure it's not just me that's happened to. So having a mono setting is not just great for people who don't take care of their headphones like I have, but also in case you're deaf in one ear. That way you hear everything coming from one end. And basically all it is it's combining both audio channels and then projecting them out of both ears. So it's pretty simple to do. We're going to talk about it later on. But yeah, mono support, super important. But speaker options is a lot more than just stereo and mono. It should also support additional setups for spatialization. I cannot speak. So proper stereo panning. This is pretty standard with 3D audio. If you use any 3D audio engine, like FMOD, you make a 3D event, put it in Unity, it'll already adapt where it is in the game world to the panning. So if it's to the left of you, you'll hear it to the left of you. If it's to the right, you'll hear it to the right. You don't need to do anything crazy there. Maybe just a bit of tweaking for like attenuation zones and whatnot if you really want to. But proper stereo panning, it's already in most games. But surround sound support is not something that comes standard. But it's a lot less practical for students, seeing as not all of us have, I'd assume most of us don't have like full-on 5.1 or 7.1 surround sound setups. But it is something to bring up because it's a lot more effective at identifying cues and where they are than stereo is, which then improves the experience for someone who can't see or might have difficulty seeing. And next one, we got subtitles and closed captions. We're moving more into something that's pretty standard. However, it is a little difficult to do. It's a lot of time you got to put into like for students at least to make sure that everything works perfectly. So this could include stuff like speech, instructions, prompts, anything verbal, and anything important should have subtitles. So there's a lot of cases of games that tell the player, okay, press A to jump, like verbally through some sort of in-game narrator. I know Kojima's a big fan of making the characters in games say like press the RT or press RT to do X action. So those kind of things 100% need subtitles, because if the player can't hear it, they have no idea what to do. So just giving them that sort of feedback, really important to teach the player how to play the game. So additional things that are really useful are closed captions for tone, as well as sound effects and ambience. So this would be like just square brackets or brackets that say angry or something like that, and then the actual line. And something that is being adopted more frequently throughout the industry is an indication of who is speaking. So that example from Spider-Man in the bottom left, it says police officer, that's the character who's speaking, and then the line itself. And one more thing for that example, better readability is an absolute must. So having backgrounds on the text is another thing that's becoming more of a standard practice, and different font size options as well. That way, so that if you have someone who can see but their vision isn't quite up to snuff, you can increase the contrast of the text or increase the size of the text to make it a lot more readable. And looking over at the Minecraft example, like I said, the Minecraft subtitles are fantastic in that they show you, well, they're a great example of sound effects, ambience, panning, and distance from the player, and it's surprisingly amazing implementation too. So off-screen sound effects have those little arrows to indicate where they are, and the whiteness of the text. As you can see, the squid swims one on the one I showed on screen. That one's a bit more gray than the rest, so that indicates how close that sound is to the player. So that would be the furthest sound in this case. So it's really good. It's a really good example of this. And keep in mind that subtitles are one of those things that could be on for a variety of reasons. It could be because of hearing loss, or they could just be in a noisy environment, be using really terrible speakers, or they want to be quiet to not wake someone up. We're all gamers. We play at 4 a.m. all the time, so you want to be quiet sometimes. It could be for localization reasons as well, because translating text is a lot easier and a lot more cost effective than translating entire scripts, and then recording that and then releasing another localized version. But it could also be for mix issues in case you can't hear something. So subtitles are really important. It's definitely something to look into if you can, but we're students. We don't have all the time in the world, so yeah. And speaking of the fact that we're students, but something I wanted to touch on anyways is localization support. So, like subtitles, if you have text, you can't read it. If you translate it to a different language that you can read, there you go, you can read it now. But if you have audio, you can't understand it, you translate that, boom, you can hear it now, you can understand what they're saying. So language barriers can be a barrier to accessibility. So let's say English isn't your first language, but you still understand enough of it. It could be a lot more beneficial to play in whatever your native tongue is. But like I said, you won't really need to worry about this for GDW. I just wanted to bring it up as something that is technically under the umbrella of accessibility, but I don't see brought up too often. So some of the top localization languages, there's two main acronyms. There's EFIGS and there's CJK. So EFIGS stands for English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish, and that covers most of the European demographics. And beside each of the languages, I do have the location or the language codes as well, which a full list of them will be found in the resources channel when I get to that at the end of the session, or after the end of the session. And the next acronym is CJK, which stands for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. And usually the language of Chinese that's done is Mandarin, just because it's the most widespread. And this will cover the three biggest Pacific Asian markets. So there are other big ones that are fairly prominent, like Russian, Portuguese, a bunch of the Indian languages like Hindi, Southeast Asian languages like those found in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. They've got a lot of gamers there, as well as Nordic country languages, so like Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. So there's really no end to the amount of languages you can localize to, but eFigs and CJK are a great start. And now getting into a practical part, I'm just gonna show a bunch of examples of a couple of the things we talked about today, and I'm going to show all of them in one FMOD Studio project, which I put into the resources folder. So if you want to check that out, follow along, feel free to do so. But yeah, I took a few examples and figured out a way to tackle them, and just going to be kind of walking you through them here. So the first one, and arguably one of the easiest to implement and most important to implement as students, is isolating dialogue and sound effects. So the way to do this most effectively for pretty much any scenario, like I said earlier when I was on this slide, would be to use sidechain compression. And without getting too much into the nitty gritty of it, sidechain compression is basically just taking the input of one mix, and then using that input to compress another mix. So let's say you have music playing, and then you get punched in the face, the punch makes a sound. That sound would then be used to compress the music. So the punch happens, the music gets ducked, the punch therefore gets cut through the mix a bit more, and then the music builds back up to the original volume. That's basically what that is. We're probably going to talk about this a bit more later down the road in a different session about effects and stuff like that, but that's enough to get started with. And using this for our purposes, for this specifically, we would want to just put a compressor on a mix channel in FMOD with everything you want to go down. So that would be background noise, music, ambience, UI sounds, whatever you want. And then add a sidechain linked to that channel from whatever channel you want boosted, or cut through, I guess. And for additional customization, you can also add a parameter that controls how much the user wants to compress it. So that's not something you see very often, if at all, but I thought it would be a pretty neat thing to look at since it's pretty easily done, and it could add a bit more accessibility, which is literally the name of the session today. So figured I'd do it. And this is basically all you need to do for it. So if you open up the mixer view in FMOD, which the shortcut for is Control-2, or you just click the window button at the top and then click the mixer view, you'll be brought to, well, the mixer view. So first things first for this, you just have to make groups on the left side of the window. So you get each of the events, you put them under the right groups, and then you'll see that there will be mixer groups that are created that look like the left side of this slide here. So I'd suggest sorting everything as much as you can, but ultimately see if you can get all the events you want ducked under one big group. So let's say you have all the music sent to one, all the background ambience sent to one, and then both of those are under just one big background group or something like that. And then you would send that then to the master bus, and then all the effects and the voice and stuff, all that, just put that in another group. For this example, I just used dialogue and background, as you can see, just to keep it simple with two groups. So once you have those two, you got to click on the background group or whatever you want ducked, and then you got to add a compressor. So how you do that is just you click to add a post or a pre-fader effect, you click on the compressor, and then yeah, once you have that, cool, then you can move back to the sidechain, which you just click on the other mix bus and then you add the sidechain, but you can add it in a way that already links it to the compressor, and to do that you just click insert sidechain and then click the compressor that you want. So in this case, it would be the background compressor. So really important. You'll need to tweak the values for the compressor to work according to your needs. But I'm super lazy, so I just left in all the default values. But this is sidechain compression in FMOD Studio. This is literally all you need to do. And this will, without tweaking, or after tweaking the settings, this will get you the effect of, oh, dialogue's talking, cool, drop the music a bit, make it a bit quieter. Or, cool, you got punched in the face, that sound effect happened, cool, music went quieter, music went back up. So, now we got that, onto the parameter that controls the intensity of the compression. To start off with, you're going to want to make a continuous parameter. And the most important thing about this is that you set it as a global parameter, because otherwise it doesn't work for the mixer and automating stuff in the mixer. So you just make the parameter, I called it compression intensity for this case, because that's exactly what it is, and I just left the range and initial value the exact same. So once you hit OK, you got that built, and once again rolling with the default values here, you just got to click threshold and ratio, and add automation from that, right clicking them, and then just hit add automation. And then using that new global intensity parameter, you click add curve, throw that parameter in, and then adjust the values. So I would highly recommend this just being left as linear lines, because any sort of non-linearity could screw with how drastic the change is. So just like think about how weird it would be if you set your volume to 50, but it's actually like 25% of the max volume, and then 50% being somewhere around the 75 value. Weird or not, yeah, it's weird and not at all what you want to have. So I'd just stick to linearity to make it easy. So, anyways, that is the sidechained compressor used to isolate dialogue or sound effects with a parameter set up to adjust the intensity just as easily as moving a slider. And another thing I'd recommend with this is having the default value have a bit of compression to it, because like I said back on this first slide, isolating important sounds and voice lines is pretty necessary and can make the mix feel a lot fuller most of the time. And from there, it also ensures that the whatever that sound is, it will always cut through. The player can always hear it. And on the same note as having the initial value not have no compression, like just a little bit's on there, I'd also try to make sure that the max intensity value isn't anything completely ludicrous as well, because if there's a voice line and then literally everything cuts out for the next like 10 seconds, that's kind of ridiculous. So just tweak the values from there. But yeah, on the middle picture here, the 2 yellow dots that were added, as you can see with the compressor in this slide, the 2 yellow dots on threshold and ratio are not there, and they're there on this one. That just means, cool, there is an automation clip on this. And the 2 automation clips can be seen at the bottom. Like I said, I just did linear. I just did a low compression ratio to a very high compression ratio as the intensity goes up. And as the intensity goes up, it drops the volume as well, or the volume threshold. So we got isolating sounds. Now we got volume controls. And as you'd expect, there's a couple ways to do this, with one of the main ways being just manually adjusting the values in the FMOD code API. But for this example, since we're audio people, not programmers, or I am at least, we're going to be looking at using parameters for this. And it's a fairly easy process, so this won't take nearly as long as the previous one, although there is a couple more steps to do, even though it's a bit easier. So once again, in the mixer window, this one's as simple as just creating another continuous global parameter, but this time you want to set the initial value to 1. And this way it just starts the volume at 100%. And if you want to be one of those games that has volume settings that go over 100%, then make sure that the value is a bit over 1. So let's say you want it to go to 200% for whatever reason. I would make the range go from 0 to 2. And yeah, either way, just try to make your initial value 1 so that it's just standard across the board. But also ensure that the value of 1 is the proper mix volume. So this is something you're going to want to do at the end. So once you've got everything mixed, you've got everything leveled exactly the way you want it, then I would go in here and make these volume parameters, and just make sure that 1 is always the max volume. So yeah, something I should have led with actually is that each of the buses or each of the mix buses or mix groups should correspond to the values that you want to control for. So let's say you have a voiceover bus for character speech, a narration bus, a more sound effects related voice lines bus. So that's like groans, yelps of pain, screaming, all that fun stuff. But you want all of them to be adjusted by one single quote unquote voice volume slider. That's honestly as easy as just mixing all of those individually as you would normally, and then taking those groups and then putting them under like one big voice group. So yeah, doing that just hooks them all up to that one master bus, and then from there, changing the volume of that master bus could then change all of them. So you could do that, or you could just hook up the one parameter to each and every bus individually, but that takes a while, we're lazy, and that's inefficient with time, so you might as well just do it the easier and more efficient way. And now you might be wondering about the master volume slider that you see in pretty much every game, and the answer is yes, this will work for the master bus as well. So if you just slap one onto these, boom, you got master volume. So how do you actually do this? You click on a bus after you've made the volume parameter. You right click on the fader volume, so that's the middle thing right between the pre-fader and the post-fader. Surprising, I know. You just right click on that, add automation, the exact same as the last one, and then you add the specific volume slider that you want to have. So in the example I uploaded, I had a master volume, background volume, dialogue volume, etc. volume, and music volume. And each of those will control the respective group. So, like I said, pretty simple, a lot easier than the previous one. And yeah, moving on to a more complex one. Speaker options. So, just to recap from the slide earlier, this is just giving the player the option to switch from stereo to mono to surround sound to whatever they want. But for this example, we're just going to do stereo and mono, although it does work for 5.1 if you wanted to go that route. So for this, we've just got to make one parameter to swap between the two options, and then two buses that kind of act as a master before the master, one for the stereo output and one for the mono output. Alright, so once again, we find ourselves in the mixer window. It's something that I keep coming back to, even though I didn't use it for the first year and a half of being a sound person, which is hilarious. But first things first, you're going to want to route everything to a new group called stereo, which is then routed to the master bus. So right below the title of this slide, I just realized how much of a mess this slide is, so I'm really sorry about that. But the right under the title, you can see there's the stereo group, and within all that is the etc. music, background, and dialogue groups. So everything's under that one big group. So yeah, once you get all that, cool, you got a stereo bus, it'll pop up on your mixer. And yeah, once you have all that, you should also make a return bus called mono. So to do that, what you got to do is there's two options on the bottom left of the kind of group window, and there's new group and there's new return. So to make a return bus, shocking, I know, you click new return and then boom, just call it mono. And then from there, this is the one kind of tricky part, you got to change the output format to mono. So right beside the groups, I put a picture of that. You just go to you click on it, go to the bottom right, it'll show out, and then you right click it and then you click mono. And as you can see, there's a ton of options there. So let's say you wanted to convert to surround 5.1, you just click on that, and vice versa for all the options you have there. So like I said, this example works for all of these, but yeah, we're just talking about mono here. So once you have both of those buses, go back to the stereo bus and then add a pre-fader send to the mono bus. So what you do there is you click it, and right beside the volume controls, you got click to add a pre-fader effect. That's where you clicked and added the compressor on in the earlier example. But instead of going under add effect, you add send and send that to mono. And what that basically does is before it hits the actual volume for the stereo track and then sends that to the master, it hits that send, and then it will send whatever's there, hence the name, to the mono track, and then the mono track then sends it to the master. So you get that added in, and then the most important thing, set the volume to as close to 0 as you can, so negative infinity decibels. That means that nothing will play through that send. And here's 1 second. I gotta stretch. Oh, talking for 40 minutes straight does that to you. All right. So, once you got the pre-fader send to the mono, then you're gonna want to make the parameter for the toggle. And once again, it is a global parameter. But this time I chose for it to be a labeled parameter. It's the exact same as a discrete parameter, which means it's integers and not one float value, which is what a continuous one is. But the difference with labeled and discrete is that discrete is just the numbers, but labels you can actually apply names to them. So obviously this would make sense. I called them stereo and mono. So it's great for just making things a bit more readable than just having a bunch of numbers and trying to remember what they are. So make that global, set the initial value to stereo, and make the second value mono. And then hit OK, you got that made. Once you got all that set up, the last step now is to add automation to the send and the volume fader to make it so that if the parameter is set to stereo, it sends nothing to the mono send, and if the parameter is mono, then it sends that audio to the send and nothing to the fader. This will effectively downmix it to mono without breaking stuff that can happen when you remove channels in real time, or in runtime rather. So this is a super quick and easy way of doing it. And with those automation clips, I have a screenshot of the full thing here. You just right click mono, add automation clips. For the left one, for stereo, just drop that all the way to nothing. And then for mono, you leave that at 0.00 decibels. And then vice versa for the stereo one, you right click that on the fader volume. Stereo, leave that at full volume, and then mono, you drop that. So basically what it does is the volume's coming, or the sound's coming through, it hits that send, it checks, okay, are we in stereo or mono? If it's in mono, cool, it sends the full volume to the mono send, and then nothing to the stereo one, and vice versa. So, like I said, pretty simple, but this honestly does it. And it doesn't end here. While I tried to cover as much as I possibly could today, like I was considering adding a localization section, but since it wasn't really practical for us, I decided to opt out of that. So there's always a lot more you can do to improve accessibility without sacrificing your creative vision. And while it absolutely does take time, it's not for nothing at all, just because it makes it a better experience for honestly everybody, whether they have a disability or not. So always try to aim for more. And on that note, with that very fitting title on this slide, this is the end of the presentation. Yeah, thanks for coming out. That was not as long as I expected, which is pretty cool. And yeah, next week we're going to be finally taking a look at some more FMOD stuff. Just giving you a rundown of all the good stuff you'll be using on a day-to-day basis. So literally all the basics I'm going to try to cover, and a bit more of the advanced stuff I'm going to try to dip our toes into. But yeah, hope to see you there.